Recently, I've been mostly indulging my casual EDH instincts in my videos, as I think there are lots of often neglected things to look for in a deck aside from its ability to win. Unfortunately, those things are going to have to go on the back burner for this video because I'm going to be talking about how I built my sweatiest deck, a deck whose construction process focused on making it as powerful as possible on the budget I gave it. My hope is that this video can serve as a bit of a guide on how to build something powerful without breaking the bank. A useful thing to do in a game where different players have different monetary resources to build decks with. With that said, my construction of this deck began in the place where a lot of decks start, figuring out an intriguing commander to look into. In this case, I opted for the partner commander pairing of Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator, and Francisco, Foul Marauder, a pair I picked out because I enjoy Dimir and I also enjoy pirates. Malcolm is going to be doing the heaviest lifting of these two, generating treasures whenever I hit opponents, but Francisco is no slouch either, offering great filtering and rapidly building up in power and toughness for purposes of smacking my opponents. And ultimately, the sheer versatility that this pairing offers is what makes them so potent. My mindset going into building this deck was this. If I make Francisco and Malcolm my default turn 2 and turn 3 plays, and then land a 1-drop pirate as often as possible, this will leave me with a powerful filtering and treasure generating engine fully online by turn 3. So that's the resource generating core of my deck: Francisco, Malcolm, and 10 1-cost pirates. Some of these are a bit janky, but they perform the function of being a 1-cost pirate, which is all I care about. Once I had my commanders and the first 10 cards out of the way, I began to do research. I was looking to build a new high power deck, and I knew that my starting point was pretty strong, so I began looking around for good ways to end the game, figuring that I'd need something a bit more focused than just hitting people with whatever pirates I have laying around. Front and center on the EDH rec page for Francisco and Malcolm were Thassa's Oracle based combos, one of the strongest combos in EDH, but this combo would have eaten a lot of my budget, and I frankly just find it kinda bland. I looked around a bit more before being reminded of a card that I'd had in the back of my mind for several years, Time Sieve, and that card seemed decidedly more my speed. See, Malcolm hopefully creates 3 treasures per turn, and Time Sieve spends 5 artifacts to grant an extra turn. Something you may notice is that these two numbers, 3 and 5, aren't very far apart. With 2 additional artifacts per turn, we can just keep on taking turns indefinitely. With this revelation, I went looking for things to help me bridge this gap. A card that immediately jumped to mind was Academy Manufactor, and this ended up being accompanied by Stormfleet Negotiator, an evasive pirate that typically produces 2 to 3 map tokens per attack. The third dedicated option I have for this is Worldwalker Helm, a card printed in the Big Score that operates very similarly to Manufactor, and this ended up replacing Ruthless Knave as my third supporting piece. There are also a few cards that produce 1 artifact per turn, as well as some cards that are or that produce a single artifact, and I call these play extenders, cards that serve to buy the deck time when it's beginning to take extra turns, but doesn't yet have a way to guarantee these turns being indefinite. After adding all these cards to boost Time Sieve up to being a full combo plan, I decided to add some tutors to find my combo. The fact that Worldwalker Helm and Academy Manufactor are artifacts is great, as it means that artifact tutors can find everything we need to win. So naturally, we start here with Fabricate, Reshape, and Whir of Invention, all artifact tutors that effectively cost 3 or less mana for purposes of finding Time Sieve. These are accompanied by Lim-Dûl's Vault and Ringsight, both somewhat more generic tutors that can find a wide range of cards, though Vault can require a hefty shave off my life total if I'm going for a specific card such as Time Sieve. These 5 tutors are supplemented with 3 transmute cards, which are great for their flexibility as they can either be cast normally as control spells or be transmuted to tutor for a card of their mana cost, with 2 and 3 being the key mana values in this deck. So with that, I had the deck's engine and I had the deck's win con. But what ended up rounding out the other 44 non-land cards in the deck? To get to that, I need to talk about perhaps the strangest thing about this deck: its extreme consistency. I can basically present what this deck is trying to do as a 5-turn map. Turns 1 to 3 in a conventional game consist of a 1-cost pirate turn 1, Francisco turn 2, and Malcolm turn 3. Turn 4 is the setup turn, where I play any other cards that might assist in my combo. Turn 5 is the combo turn. This is usually the turn where I'll tutor for my Time Sieve if needed, play it, then hopefully begin a series of however many turns are needed to beat down my opponents. Sometimes turns 1 to 3 go a bit differently. usually if I don't have access to a 1-drop or if I have something different I want to play on turn 2 or 3, but needing to play Francisco or Malcolm turn 4 is decidedly not the end of the world. The fact that I have that turn where nothing needs to be played gives me a little bit of wiggle room in my curve out. The deck also varies a little bit in when it goes off. Sometimes I'll delay the combo to turn 6, especially if I needed to spend my treasures interacting with my opponents in some way on an earlier turn. Likewise, the deck is able to combo off on turn 4 about 10% of the time when things line up just right, though this also usually means going for the win without counterspell backup, so I'll only do this if my opponents are tapped out or if I expect one of them to do something big on their next turn. The speed of this deck is limited by the fact that Malcolm generates at most 3 treasures per turn, meaning that it generally takes multiple turns with Malcolm on board to generate the treasure surpluses needed to go off. To talk about what I chose for the rest of the cards in this deck, I need to go back to that critical setup turn, turn 4. This turn is where I develop all manner of things that might be useful for purposes of comboing off. The first of these is draw. Francisco's filtering is lovely, but I've found that if I don't already have what I need to combo in hand, I'm generally using that filtering to aggressively dig for tutors and combo pieces, passing up potentially useful cards. For that reason, having a bit of draw in addition is good, and there's one particular type of draw that stands out above all others in this deck, cards that let me draw when I hit people. This deck runs all 4 Bident of Thassa effects that exist, and this is for good reason. Landing one of these on turn 4 is great. That extra stream of cards almost always smooths out any issues I might have in comboing off, and these effects can even generate enough value to let me keep up as a mid-range deck in the event my time sieve bites the dust. Other draw effects include Combat Research, Curious Inquiry, and Curious Obsession. The draw post-combat is nice, and +1/+1 is also nice for if I'm going into turn 3 with a 0/1 Francisco and want to play that plus a 2-drop rather than Malcolm. The rest of my draw suite has been rotating around a bit between different options. Currently, I'm running Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, delve cards that can utilize the unnecessary stuff that Francisco has dumped into the graveyard. Another type of card I tend to develop on my setup turn is Mana Rocks. Since all of these tap for mana immediately, the 2-mana ones effectively cost a single colorless, and weaving them into a turn 4 can offer a nice burst of mana for my early combo turns, and also an artifact to be sacrificed to time sieve if needed. The last main type of card I find myself playing on my setup turn is Additional Pirates. Theoretically, a 1-drop pirate, a Francisco, and a Malcolm maxes out my commander triggers per turn, but realistically, creatures die sometimes, and there are also games where I have a 1-drop on the ground and need a flyer for an opponent with blockers, or alternatively an unblockable creature to get past flyers an opponent has. Some of my pirates have that extra little bit of evasion, and others have other upsides such as having some sweet removal stapled to them or offering a bit of extra filtering. A final supportive pirate is Oaken Siren, a bulk common that feels like it was designed just for this deck. It flies, it can tap post-combat to cast my combo pieces, and it itself is an artifact that can be sacrificed to time sieve. Beautiful card, love it. Since this deck is still a pirates deck in addition to being a combo deck, I also ended up adding an alternative win con, Haunted One. This card pumps my team's power by 4 if both commanders swing, which can turn a handful of evasive pirates into a veritable player-killing machine. At this point, I need to get to arguably the thing that gives the deck most of its power, the Interaction Suite. My deck is running 13 counterspells, a number that may strike a lot of casual EDH players as mildly obscene, but this number works out well for a couple reasons. First of all, the deck's core is very compact, being comprised of the command zone and 19 cards from the deck. Even having added in a bunch of utility stuff to help smooth things out, there's still a lot of space to work with, and counterspells are a great way to fill that space because they can both protect what I'm doing and hinder what opponents are doing. The other reason counterspells work so well is because of treasures. I've talked before about the issue of counterspells effectively wasting mana if they aren't used, and a great thing about treasures is that they're never wasted mana due to their one-time use nature. The fact that they serve this dual purpose of being both stored mana and also artifact tokens for time sieve is quite good. I can tap out every turn and still have mana available for counterspells if they're needed. Now, spending treasures to play counterspells is still consuming a resource, so a lot of times I do leave up a land or two to reduce the number of treasures I need to sacrifice, but even when I do need to spend treasures, it's usually fine. The deck can often sacrifice a couple treasures and still combo off on time, and even when it does need to spend enough treasures to delay its combo by a turn, that's still not too bad for me, as it forces my opponents to spend mana and lets me avoid needing to cough up the mana to recast Malcolm. I'm also running some number of removal spells, though this count can afford to be lower since I'll have counter spells to counter spooky things before they hit the board, and the deck also aims to win before most decks get around to playing a lot of big bombs. Lastly, I'll just talk briefly about the mana base. This deck's mana base follows a simple principle. I want untapped colored mana as often as possible. Following from this goal, every single land in the deck can theoretically play a pirate turn 1, and though this means running some spicy lands, such as Gemstone Mine that can see diminishing returns later, these are worth it for purposes of guaranteeing that I'm able to set up my engine correctly. This desire for colored mana also motivates the deck's land count, currently sitting at 35. My curve is extremely low, and Francisco actively encourages me to run fewer lands. I want him to hit a non-land card on his first Explore trigger so he can attack the following turn, and he also offers a way to dig for additional land plays in games where I keep a 2-land hand. And if I had access to expensive dual lands that could guarantee having the colors I need, I probably would cut at least 2 lands. But since I don't have access to these, I've opted to stick with my current land count, though I may experiment with cutting down to 34 lands at some point. Alright, so I've been hyping up this deck a lot, and it is quite good. However, there are some notable weaknesses with the deck, and I think it's useful to talk about these and think about how to solve them. The first is that it usually won't have mana to deal with removal before the end of combat on turn 3. Malcolm generates treasures when pirates connect with opponents, but if an opponent has an instant speed kill spell for Malcolm before I get treasures, the deck has no response unless it has a foil or misdirection in hand, and it will likely need to delay its combo attempt by 1 or more turns. This issue I'm currently choosing to take the L on, as it has only come up a couple times, and the free counterspells I'm not currently running aren't all that appealing to me. Another weakness that I alluded to earlier is that this deck's engine relies on dealing combat damage to opponents, so if there are 1 or more opponents that it's unable to attack, the deck won't perform at full efficiency. This issue is decidedly more manageable. The deck's commanders already have flying, and most of the pirates in the deck have either flying or a more robust form of evasion. The deck can also usually afford to only hit 2 opponents for a turn or 2, and Francisco gets big pretty fast, so a lot of times the best bet is to send him at the opponent with flyers and force chump blocks in order to open up that opponent for further attacks. I've also considered cards such as Thieves' Tools to help with this, though I haven't felt the need to add that just yet. The third weakness of the deck is the most problematic and also the most complicated, and that's that the deck has a difficult time recovering from major setbacks. The main reason for this is that the deck's card quality just isn't that high, and in my opinion, this is the biggest factor that holds this deck back from competing with competitive EDH decks. CEDH decks typically have very high card quality, with most non-land cards being extremely efficient and or flexible. Even in Yuriko, the CEDH deck that's most similar to this one, there are powerful supporting cards with impactful effects that require no setup and no other cards to utilize. By contrast, this deck has a lean mana curve, and much of its space is dominated by cards that don't do much without its commanders in play. Even the bigger draw spells require creatures in play to be good, and though the deck has plenty of counterspells to keep away board wipes during its most pivotal turns, I've had games where things stalled out and the deck's board eventually got worn down through attrition. This is the weakness that I'm trying hardest to solve, and I've had a few ideas. A funky card I'm trying out at the moment is Echo Storm, which functions as a play extender if I'm trying to combo, and it can also be a big burst of value off a single card if I'm trying to recover from a point of my commanders getting killed multiple times. I may also opt to trade out a couple removal spells for additional draw, which would help in general with stallouts and hopefully prevent me from fully losing my board. Solving a budget-related problem without increasing the budget of the deck is difficult, but it's a fun challenge to grapple with. Even with its weaknesses, this deck does a good job demonstrating what higher power commander on a budget can look like, or to some extent, what it needs to look like. You can build a lot of different decks up to a relatively high power level, but as you creep into the higher end of high power casual and begin to approach the wild world of CEDH, decks need to be very streamlined in both what they do and how well they can stop other people from doing things, and this becomes doubly true when you add in a budget element that restricts card quality. Ultimately, building a deck of this caliber on a limited budget relies on having 2 interconnected attributes: an efficient game plan, typically helped out by a powerful command zone, and also a high interaction density. I like to say that the best way to build a strong deck is to take a fundamentally broken Magic card and put it into your command zone. And while this statement isn't untrue, a more helpful phrasing might be that it's helpful to have your command zone contribute to both resource generation and to defeating your opponents. In this case, my command zone is part of an infinite turns combo, and it also offers some ramp and filtering. We can see this pattern echoed in other powerful budget commanders such as Niv Mizzet, Yuriko, and Elevir of the Wild Court. The fact that these sorts of commanders support a deck's game plan so holistically is important because it allows that plan to be relatively compact for how powerful it is, not occupying too much deck space. When you're evaluating powerful commander decks, what the deck is doing proactively to win and what the deck is doing reactively to deal with opposing plays often exist in a state of tension due to deck space being limited. So naturally, if you're able to improve the efficiency of a deck's proactive game plan and let it keep up at the same power level with fewer slots, this will give the deck more space to be faster, more interactive, or a little of both. That interaction density is the other part of what makes powerful commander decks so powerful. I know a lot of casual EDH players who dislike counterspells, but the fact that they can both hinder opponents and protect your own game plan from hate is very useful, and the usefulness of both them and removal actually scales with deck speed. One of the reasons people don't run much interaction in Casual Commander is because the format is full of dirtily mid-range decks that are going to be playing out a long stream of nasty high-cost spells in the late game, and dealing with one player's cards often just allows a different player to play their stuff unimpeded. But when your opponents only have a handful of turns to develop their concerning things before you're threatening a win, the number of things that actually require dealing with will often be smaller and easier to dismantle. Countering one of a player's 3 bombs isn't all that great, but countering a single combo piece or value engine or board wipe can sometimes be enough to slow an opponent down for long enough to execute a win. To cap off this video, I would like to reiterate, decks being strong isn't everything, and a lot of players are decidedly not looking for cutthroat games with tables full of fast combo decks. I can't really play with this deck in my normal playgroup without it feeling wildly out of place, which is kind of a downside for a deck to have. I'd also argue that the current EDH space puts too much emphasis on ways to improve the raw power level of decks without considering how playing with or against these decks ends up feeling. At the same time, it's a fact of life that a lot of people are looking to make their decks more powerful. This is a competitive card game, after all. It's also a fact of life that different people have different amounts of money that they want to spend on the game, and that fact can be felt in the power of decks sometimes. Proxies are one solution to this issue, but they will never be the whole solution, if for no other reason than that they're not allowed at any Wizards of the Coast affiliated event. Just as it's useful to know when to hold off on cramming powerful cards into a deck, it's also useful to know exactly how to ratchet up the power of a deck when you want to do that, and being able to do so without needing to crank up the card quality with expensive staples is a great skill to have. Thanks for making it to the end. This video ended up a little longer than I was intending. I'm going to be doing another deck review this month over on my Patreon, so if you want a chance to get your deck reviewed by me, you can head over there and start giving me money sometime in the next 5 days. If you give me enough money, you can even join the people you see on screen here. Pretty tempting, huh?